Jim Collins has always represented for me American diplomacy at its best.
One of the words that was always used to describe Jim was pro, a professional. Jim was a great diplomat and a great ambassador.
He also is, I think, a natural diplomat. He is a straight shooter.
You could always count on wise advice from Jim, always.
What you see is what you get from Jim Collins.
Like I think a lot of people that I know who are friends who've ended up in the Russian world, I got there, in my case, through music. I took part in a performance of music from the opera Boriska Dunov, and I got hooked.
I first met him when I was teaching for the first time Russian history in the Harvard Summer School, and he survived that course, went on to do very distinguished work in the study of Russian history.
I went into the Foreign Service then and did a career of 3.5 decades. And that career was fundamentally focused on the Soviet Union, East Europe.
I remember Jim saying that it's really important not to be shy about delivering tough messages to Russians or to any host government, but try to do it in a way that's not preachy or patronizing. Do it in a way that takes into account the fact that Russians are going to have their own perspectives on a lot of different issues, not always hospitable to ours.
As both a student and a diplomat, he stands at the very top of his class, among those people who understood the seriousness of the issue before them. How can the United States and Russia somehow get along?
Jim Collins was the man on the spot running the American embassy in Moscow at the two most important turning points in the modern history of Russia.
I served in Moscow 3 times in the early 70s, in 1990 to 93, and then 1997 to 2001 when I was the ambassador. After that, I left government, but I stayed really engaged with, I suppose, my Russian connections. And I've worked really for the last 1.5 decades trying to promote a better understanding on each side of the other, and also to develop the kinds of programs and so forth that produced lasting linkages between the two societies.
He knew the culture, the language, not just of the Russians, but the other groups in the USSR as well, and knowledge and facts as a pretty good starting point for policy.
I had 3 jobs. I was an analyst, trying to explain to Washington what was happening in the country where I was, in this case, Russia. But I was also a chief executive officer of what I used to call the Russia division of the US government. And I had, I think, something like 1,600 employees at the American Embassy, a couple of dozen government agencies, and an overall taxpayer expended budget of about $1 billion. That was a big responsibility.
He delegated responsibility to us, but inspired all of us by the way he managed the embassy. He had actually a sign that was made for him and put above his desk, "Concern is not a policy." In other words, you can wring your hands, you can say, I'm really worried about that. But the point is, you've got to come up with concrete solutions.
I saw him a number of times in the final days of the Soviet Union, particularly around the time of the abortive coup against Gorbachev. He helped me to understand several layers down of what was really going on there. And also, he had an extraordinary sense of what the outside world, in particular the United States, could do to be part of the solution to the problems that were so evident at the time, and also some of the dilemmas for U.S. policy.
Here it is 15, 16 years since he was ambassador, and when he travels to Moscow, senior Russians in the government still want to meet with him. And that tells you a lot about how much respect they have for him.
As I look back on a career, I would say that the point for me always was that you had a responsibility to make the world a better place or leave it a better place than when you started out.
He set a really fine example of what a successful American ambassador in Russia ought to try to do. He was one of the handful of people that I would always seek out for advice and for good common sense judgments about careers and about foreign policy. And Jim also emphasized, as I always tried to be mindful of in my career, the importance of taking care of your people.
When I would knock at Jim's door and just seek his advice and his guidance, that door was always open. He was so generous with the time that he gave not only me, but other people like me seeking information about Russia.
He was always the envoy, the personification of the United States. All the skills that a great Foreign Service officer needs to have, he had.
I found from the very first time I met Jim that he was about as perceptive, balanced, and in some ways really quite prophetic about what was going on in particularly the Gorbachev era as the USSR came to an end and post-Soviet Russia was emerging.
Jim was always calm, unflappable, always thinking things through.
I'm very grateful to all who thought I was the kind of person and I was someone who had made the contribution that would entitle me to such an award. And so I accept it with great humility, I have to say, and I am deeply grateful to all of those people who had some role in making it possible.
Thank you so much for the example of diplomatic excellence and personal integrity that you always set for me and for my generation of American diplomats.
You and I have talked about the pursuit of peace, and you are dedicated to it, and I take my hat off to you.
I just want to say how proud I am to have been your friend, to have been your colleague.
Jim, you deserve congratulations that you never sought and credit that you never claimed for being the pioneer and an example of what an international civil servant can do to advance the cause of peace and mutual understanding.
We remember the many, many times that we have spent with you, both working on policy, but also having a good time together.
Thanks in particular for your friendship, which I'll always treasure.
Jim, warmest congratulations. I hope this night means as much to you as it means to all those who admire you.